The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, 1974, popularly known as the SOLAS Convention. The following information is from the IMO, International Maritime Organization, about IMO page. It was adopted on the 1st of November 1974 and entered into force on the 25th of May 1980. The SOLAS Convention is regarded as the most important of all international treaties concerning the safety of merchant ships. The first version was adopted in 1914 in response to the Titanic disaster, the second in 1929, the third in 1948, and the fourth in 1960. The 1974 version includes the tacit acceptance procedure, which provides that an amendment shall enter into force on a specified date unless, before that date, objections to the amendment are received from an agreed number of parties. As a result, the 1974 Convention has been updated and amended on numerous occasions. The convention in force today is sometimes referred to as SOLAS 1974 as amended. The technical provisions. The main objective of the SOLAS Convention is to specify minimum standards for the construction, equipment and operation of ships compatible with their safety. Flag states are responsible for ensuring that ships under their flag comply with its requirements, and a number of certificates are prescribed in the Convention as proof that this has been done. Control provisions also allow contracting governments to inspect ships of other contracting states if there are clear grounds for believing that the ship and its equipment do not substantially comply with the requirements of SOLAS. This procedure is known as PSC, Port State Control. The current SOLAS Convention includes articles setting out general obligations, amendment procedure, and so on, followed by an annex divided into 14 chapters as follows. Chapter 1 are the general provisions, which include regulations concerning the survey of the various types of ships and the issuing of documents signifying that the ship meets the requirements of the Convention. This chapter also includes provisions for the control of ships in ports of other contracting governments. Chapter 2-1 refers to the construction. Under it are the subdivision and stability, machinery, and electrical installations. The subdivision of passenger ships into watertight compartments must be such that after assumed damage to the ship's hull, the vessel will remain afloat and stable. Requirements for watertight integrity and bilge pumping arrangements for passenger ships are also laid down, as well as stability requirements for both passenger and cargo ships. The degree of subdivision, measured by the maximum permissible distance between two adjacent bulkheads, varies with ship's length and the service in which it is engaged. The highest degree of subdivision applies to passenger ships. Requirements covering machinery and electrical installations are designed to ensure that services which are essential for the safety of the ship, passengers, and crew are maintained under various emergency conditions. Goal-based standards for oil tankers and bulk carriers were adopted in 2010, requiring new ships to be designed and constructed for a specified design life and to be safe and environmentally friendly in intact and specified damage conditions throughout their life. Under the regulation, ships should have adequate strength, integrity, and stability to minimize the risk of loss of the ship or pollution to the marine environment due to structural failure including collapse, resulting in flooding or loss of watertight integrity. Chapter 2-2 regulates fire protection, fire detection, and fire extinction. This includes detailed fire safety provisions for all ships and specific measures for passenger ships, cargo ships, and tankers. They include the following principles: division of the ship into main and vertical zones by thermal and structural boundaries, separation of accommodation spaces from the remainder of the ship by thermal and structural boundaries, restricted use of combustible materials, detection of any fire in the zone of origin, containment and extinction of any fire in the space of origin, protection of the means of escape or of access for firefighting purposes, ready availability of fire extinguishing appliances, and minimization of the possibility of ignition of flammable cargo vapor. Chapter 3 requires life-saving appliances and arrangements. This chapter includes requirements for life-saving appliances and arrangements, including requirements for lifeboats, rescue boats, and life jackets according to type of ship. The International Life-Saving Appliance, or LSA, code gives specific technical requirements for LSAs and is mandatory under Regulation 34, which states that all life-saving appliances and arrangements shall comply with the applicable requirements of the LSA code. Chapter 4 deals with radio communications. The chapter incorporates the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, or GMDSS. All passenger ships and all cargo ships of 300 gross tonnage and upwards on international voyages are required to carry equipment designed to improve the chances of rescue following an accident, including satellite emergency position, indicating radio beacons or EPIRBs, and search and rescue transponders or SARTs for the location of the ship or survival craft. Regulations in Chapter 4 cover undertakings by contracting governments to provide radio communication services, as well as ship requirements for carriage of radio communications equipment. This chapter is closely linked to the radio regulations of the International Telecommunication Union. Chapter 5 deals with enhanced safety of navigation. Chapter 5 identifies certain navigation safety services which should be provided by contracting governments and sets forth provisions of an operational nature applicable in general to all ships and all voyages. This is in contrast to the Convention as a whole, which only applies to certain classes of ship engaged in international voyages. The subjects covered include the maintenance of meteorological services for ships, the ice patrol service, routing of ships, and the maintenance of search and rescue services. This chapter also includes a general obligation for masters to proceed to the assistance of those in distress, and for contracting governments to ensure that all ships shall be sufficiently and efficiently manned from a safety point of view. This chapter makes mandatory the carriage of Voyage Data Recorder, or VDRs, and Automatic Ship Identification Systems, or AIS. Chapter 6 is about the carriage of cargoes. This chapter covers all types of cargo, except liquids and gases in bulk, which, owing to their particular hazards to ships or persons on board, may require special precautions. The regulations include requirements for stowage and securing of cargo or cargo units, such as containers. This chapter requires cargo ships carrying grain to comply with the International Grain Code. Chapter 7 regulates carriage of dangerous goods. The regulations are contained in 3 parts. Part A. Carriage of dangerous goods in package form includes provisions for the classification, packing, marking, labeling, and placarding, documentation and storage of dangerous goods. Contracting governments are required to issue instructions at the national level, and the chapter makes mandatory the International Maritime Dangerous Goods or IMDG Code, developed by IMO, which is constantly updated to accommodate new dangerous goods and to supplement or revise existing provisions. Part A-1, Carriage of dangerous goods in solid form in bulk, covers the documentation, stowage, and segregation requirements for these goods, and requires reporting of incidents involving such goods. Part B covers construction and equipment of ships carrying dangerous liquid chemicals in bulk, and requires chemical tankers to comply with the International Bulk Chemical Code or IBC. Part C covers construction and equipment of ships carrying liquefied gases in bulk and gas carriers to comply with requirements of the International Gas Carrier Code or IGC. Part D includes special requirements for the carriage of packaged irradiated nuclear fuel, plutonium, and high-level radioactive wastes on board ships, and requires ships carrying such products to comply with the International Code for the safe carriage of packaged irradiated nuclear fuel, plutonium, and high-level radioactive wastes on board ships or INF Code. This chapter requires carriage of dangerous goods to be in compliance with the relevant provisions of the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code or IMDG Code. Chapter 8 deals with nuclear ships. It gives basic requirements for nuclear-powered ships and is particularly concerned with radiation hazards. It refers to detailed and comprehensive Code of Safety for Nuclear Merchant Ships, which was adopted by the IMO Assembly in 1981. Chapter 9 is for the management for the safe operation of ships. This chapter makes mandatory the International Safety Management or ISM Code, which requires a safety management system to be established by the ship owner or any person who has assumed responsibility for the ship, the company. Chapter 10 requires safety measures for high-speed craft. This chapter makes mandatory the International Code of Safety for High-Speed Craft or HSC Code. Chapter 11-1 are special measures to enhance maritime safety. This chapter clarifies requirements relating to the authorization of recognized organizations responsible for carrying out surveys and inspections on administration's behalfs, enhanced surveys, ship identification number scheme, and port state control on operational requirements. Regulation 11-2 are special measures to enhance maritime security. Regulation 11-2/3 of the chapter enshrines the International Ship and Port Facilities Security Code or ISPS Code. Part A of the code is mandatory, and Part B contains guidance as to how best to comply with the mandatory requirements. Regulation 11-2/8 confirms the role of the master in exercising his professional judgment over decisions necessary to maintain the security of the ship. It says, he shall not be constrained by the company, the charterer, or any other person in this respect. Regulation 11-2/5 requires all ships to be provided with a ship security alert system. Regulation 11-2/6 covers requirements for port facilities, providing among other things for contracting governments to ensure that port facility security assessments are carried out and that port facility security plans are developed, implemented, and reviewed in accordance with the ISPS code. Other regulations in this chapter cover the provision of information to IMO, the control of ships in port, including measures such as the delay, detention, restriction of operations, including movement within the port, or expulsion of a ship from port, and the specific responsibility of companies. Chapter 12 gives additional safety measures for bulk carriers. This chapter includes structural requirements for bulk carriers over 150 meters in length. Chapter 13 deals with the verification of compliance. It makes mandatory, from January 1, 2016, the IMO member state audit scheme. Chapter 14 requires safety measures for ships operating in polar waters. This chapter makes mandatory, from January 1, 2017, the introduction and Part 1-A of the International Code for Ships Operating in Polar Waters, or the Polar Code. Thank you for listening in this discussion. Enjoy learning!